Hi everybody, this is my Module 12 case study. So to summarize the case, it deals with the principal at St. Regis. He recently been informed about a copyright violation by his librarian, and so we're kind of looking into that. St. Regis is a small rural school that has around 420 kids with limited funding. They do have a PTA that helped to raise funds to purchase the different computers over the past year, 3 years with new software. For the next 2 years, Mrs. Lynn, the librarian and media specialist, and Mr. Sample, the principal, did prioritize the software that was selected and how it could be utilized on a broader scale, and ordered blank CDs to make copies of these programs without seeking any copyright approval. Mrs. Lynn made and offered copies to all 2nd, 3rd, and 4th grade teachers during this time, including a new teacher, Mrs. Brandon. Mrs. Brandon did inform Mrs. Lynn of the copyright violation when she offered the copy disc and was met with backlash. Mrs. Brandon also approached Mr. Sample to let him know the violation and Mrs. Lynn's response. Mr. Sample then approached Miss Lynn to ask her about copying the CDs. Miss Lynn was proud that she was able to save the school money and provide greater opportunities for the students by making these programs more widely available. Mr. Sample informed Miss Lynn of the copyright violation and instructed her to collect all the copies and stop making new copies. Mr. Sample was again met with resistance from Mrs. Lynn. So legal and ethical issues here. Copyright laws are designed to protect those who produce the creative works. Okay, so when a copyright law is violated, the author of the work suffers a financial loss and lose incentive to create more original work. If caught, the St. Regis School, the school district, Mrs. Lynn, and possibly Mr. Sample would be found liable for copyright infringement. Mrs. Lynn making copies of the software without prior approval from the authors is a violation of the copyright laws. There is a likely a breach of contract by Mrs. Lynn, assuming that St. Regis School District has policies and procedures in place for teachers and staff to follow regarding the copyright laws. In addition, it may be against Mrs. Lynn's code of ethics for teachers to violate copyright laws. According to the narrative, Mrs. Lynn made the copies available to all the teachers and classrooms the software pertained to, so this is most likely no discrimination or harassment present. And looking forward, it may be important to acknowledge that Mrs. Brandon was the whistleblower and protect her from discrimination and harassment from other teachers, possibly the PTA. What exactly happened was Mrs. Lynn, the librarian, made copies of a new software program the school and PTA had purchased, distributed the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and grade teachers, and was recently informed that another teacher that this practice was a violation of copyright laws. So the people and what we know about the people, you have Mrs. Lynn, who was approached by several teachers about how to expand the use of the new software programs throughout the school. She made copies of the program and distributed them to other teachers. Mrs. Brandon discussed the potential for the copyright violations with Miss Lynn and brought those same concerns to the principal, Mr. Sample. Mr. Sample asked Mrs. Lynn about the situation and informed her of the law. Mrs. Brandon is a new teacher to the school and now has concerns about getting along with her coworkers. Due to this, Mr. Sample is relatively new to the school as well, and the PTA is involved in fundraising the efforts for the school to help get the money allocated for the software. What we don't know about the people is if Mrs. Lynn's first time copying software, what teachers may have specifically asked Mrs. Lynn to make copies for them, whether any teachers or students utilized the copied software, what level of copyright license did the software hold, and whether the superintendent, PTA students, or other teachers were aware of this violation. And if we don't know the district has any policies or procedures against copyright laws. About the program, we know that St. Regis is a rural school located approximately 25 miles from the nearest town. Mrs. Lynn copied the software on the school's grounds inside the school. About the program, St. Regis School is a public K-8 school. The funding for this school is limited, and the curriculum is partially funded by the PTA. The grade levels, which we know curriculum has been copied to 2nd, 3rd, and 4th grade, and Mrs. Lynn served as the computer lab teacher in this school, along with being the librarian and media specialist. What we don't know about the place is that the demographics of the town, students or teachers, or the physical condition of the school. We don't know which school programs the copies were made for, whether it's special education, bilingual, whatever it may be. And we don't know whether Mrs. Lynn received proper training from the school district before taking the role as computer lab teacher. And we don't know if the software company allows copies to be made on other school computers. As far as what was said, Mrs. Brandon told Mr. Sample that the teachers were using illegal software. Mrs. Lynn admitted to Mr. Sample that she did make copies of the software, and Mrs. Lynn told Mr. Sample that several other teachers want the software uploaded to their computers as well. What we can infer from the case study is that students and teachers have been using this illegal software. Mrs. Lynn is aware of the copyright violation, but believes since it is a small school, it doesn't matter. We can infer that older teachers such as Mrs. Williams are less concerned about the copyright violation, and that the PTA is unaware that they are making copies and going against copyright laws. And we can infer that the superintendent also is unaware of the violation. To review and prioritize the information, the school board, school district, administrators, teachers, and PTA could be considered stakeholders. Mrs. Lynn, Mrs. Evans, and possibly the school district could be held liable for copyright violations. Even though the PTA could be considered a stakeholder since they helped fund the curriculum, I feel that the school and the school district have no legal obligation to include them in the consultation or decision-making in this case. Mr. Sample still needs to consult with the superintendent, school board, and possibly software company before coming to a decision. And it is also a good idea for Mr. Sample to meet with teachers to discuss who has used the illegal copy software to get more information about it. I do feel that Mr. Sample should gather as much information as possible to make sure he has a clear understanding of what happened and who was involved prior to reaching a decision. There are still more people involved that he has not spoken with yet, and other people not mentioned in the narrative who need to be part of the decision-making process. So some of the options: you can take no disciplinary action against Mrs. Lynn or Mrs. Evans. You can make a formal documentation of disciplinary actions for Mrs. Lynn and Mrs. Evans. You can take no immediate action and start the investigation process. Another option is to turn the situation immediately over to the superintendent for further evaluation. Or lastly, you could recommend the termination of Mrs. Lynn from St. Regis School, Mrs. Evans from the PTA to the superintendent without due process. The evaluation of the options here. The first option, take no disciplinary action for Mrs. Lynn. What that does is it assures that all parties involved that was a mistake and no further action will need to be made. The second option of taking disciplinary action against Mrs. Lynn: collect all copied software, scrub the classroom computers completely clean. Number 3 is make a formal documentation of disciplinary actions for Mrs. Lynn that does nothing about the copied software. And number 4 is make a formal documentation of disciplinary action for Mrs. Lynn, collect all the copied software, scrub the computers clean. Number 5, take no immediate action, but start the process of collecting all the disks, removal of the software off the computers, evaluate the software program's copyright laws, and review the school's district policies for internet acceptable use. You then determine if Mrs. Lynn had appropriate training for her new role and collaboration with the superintendent on the situation for appropriate actions moving forward. Number 6 would be to turn it over immediately to the superintendent and let the superintendent deal with the issue. Or you could recommend the termination of Mrs. Lynn from St. Regis. The best option, in my opinion, is to take no immediate action, but do start the process of the investigation. Go through and collect all the disks, remove all the programs from the computers, evaluate the policies, and go from there. Get all of the information. Let the superintendent communicate with the PTA on the situation. This option allows for the greatest care of attention to the concern of all stakeholders. It covers the school district from possible legal issues, whether it be copyright infringement, wrongful termination, harassment. It removes the copied softwares from the computers and from the different individuals. And it follows the chain of command to where you legally are in the best case scenario. The impact of the decision or implementing the decision is that you alert the superintendent of the situation, alert Miss Lynn to the process that's going to happen, collect all of the non-original copies of the software, scrub all the computers clean, and communicate with the people involved in the incident and let them know the process. We're going to refer and follow district policy, and we're going to follow the software copyright laws. We're going to reiterate that not only the internal investigation and spoken to other people, and then we're going to evaluate the damages and possible lawful wrongdoing and determine if the situation was intentional copyright law infringement. All along the way, we'll be communicating with the superintendent and the Board of Education. We'll handle the situation internally. Mrs. Lynn will get a written warning for wrongdoing. There's no legal issue that goes along with that. It's believed that this is not the first time of such incidents happening. We're going to give her professional development training to emphasize the digital citizenship and education ethics. We believe that it is not the first time that it's happened, so she receives first professional development training, and she would be liable for all damages there. We would handle this situation again with maternally, and Mrs. Lynn would have to go through these different processes to continue on. The future, we're going to make sure that professional development focuses on copyright laws so that every teacher understands this. Mrs. Sample and the superintendent will hold a meeting for the PTA to do this and acknowledge the work that both groups do and reiterate what's going on. We're going to encourage teachers to look for free or cheaper alternative programs, and the district and school board could approve a grant writing a writer to secure funding for these programs. In conclusion, the first step, Mr. Sample, is to gather more information from Mrs. Brandon, Mrs. Lynn, Mrs. Evans, and all the teachers. The next step for Mr. Sample is to meet with the administrators, legal professionals, and stakeholders. I believe that Mr. Sample should self-report the incident to the software company. After gathering all the information possible, meeting with the proper individuals, going through the different scenarios, we can decide how to present the case to the PTA and Mrs. Evans. And I feel that there are too many unanswered questions from the narrative to come to a single conclusion for this case study. That's where I came after reviewing it. Thank you guys, and I really did enjoy this class.